Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys at a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
Well, it was my week to pick the movie, and just sort of out of the blue, I chose 1985's Re-Animator. Pretty famous horror movie directed by Stuart Gordon. The reason I picked it was just because it's, I think, one of the more notorious, I suppose, horror movies. It's a franchise. There are at least three, I think.
There's three. Mm-hmm.
And we just hadn't done it yet. And this was one that had always been on the shelves in the horror section. In fact, my understanding is, although it did okay in the theater, and it was actually surprisingly well reviewed at the time by the critics, it wasn't like a smashing success, but it apparently found huge success on home video release. Some of that may be due to the fact that what they released in the theater was an R-rated version, and what came out in home video was a little closer to the movie that they wanted. I think had almost an extra 15 minutes in it, which was the one that pretty much everybody ended up seeing, which has all the gore effects and all the shocking scenes and things intact. So I remember seeing this as a kid and being pretty impressed with it. So I just thought, yeah, let's watch Reanimator. I really had not seen it since I was a kid. I hadn't seen any of the other movies in the franchise. It was a fun movie. It was a bit notorious, but it wasn't something I was terribly interested in continuing to, see, what happens in part 2, what happens in part 3. So I kind of stopped there. How about you, Craig? What's your history with Reanimator?
I remember seeing it on the shelves all the time, and I don't remember specifically why I never picked it up. I don't know. The box art is, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but it's a little silly looking. It's kind of schlocky looking, and so I think that probably as a kid, I assumed that it was intentionally schlocky, and maybe that's why I wasn't really drawn to it. So I didn't see it until I was in college, graduate school actually, but we've been doing this for so long now that when you recommended that we do this, I was 100% sure that we had already done it. I was positive that we had already done it. And I'm Googling us and Reanimator, and I'm like, I know it's there. It's got to be there. We have surely done this movie. But we hadn't.
It's crazy, right? It's so true. I'm honestly not sure why either. Again, it's just one of those movies. I think every horror fan knows of it, even if you haven't seen it. I think it's just one of those that gets brought up every now and then and talked about, but not like on the same level as most other horror franchises. It's like the lower rent one.
Yeah, but at the same time, I also think that it's very much considered like a camp classic, and I think that it deserves that recognition. And there's a lot of really good stuff going on here.
There really is.
Like, the cinematography's good, the effects are cool. It's an interesting, dark, but also darkly comedic story. It pushes some boundaries, almost to the point of making me a little bit uncomfortable in some places, which is good, I think. But I also don't think that it crosses the line into being entirely distasteful. It's weird because it's campy and silly, and you could almost call it so bad it's good, except for that it's really not bad. It's just it's just different and odd, but also fun, and definitely, like, I feel like if you are a horror fan, you're obligated to see it, and I don't think I don't think that you're going to be disappointed. It may not be your cup of tea, but I think that if you appreciate the genre, you're going to appreciate the movie and what they were doing here. And there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about,
Yes.
Gosh, so it's directed by Stuart Gordon, who we've done a couple of his movies. We've done Dolls, which was a favorite of mine when I was a kid. We did Castle Freak, which neither of us loved, but it was fun to talk about.
We haven't done Castle Freak.
We haven't
Craig.
yet?
Craig, we
Which
have
one am I thinking of?
Haven't.
Which one am I thinking of with the guy in the ice palace in the basement.
Oh, no, you're thinking of that's that Canadian one. He didn't have anything to do. Ghost Story.
I don't know what it was. I always think of that as Castle Freak. Okay, so we haven't done Castle Freak yet, but I'm familiar with the title. See, I told you, I can't remember. 6 years, 300 plus episodes. I have no idea.
I completely understand.
But okay, so we're familiar with Stuart Gordon. It's also produced by Brian Yuzna, who, by the way, directed both sequels. But Brian Yuzna did Society, which remains one of the weirdest movies I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. He also did one of the Silent Night, Deadly Nights, I think part 3 or 4.
The Initiation, also a very bizarre
Very
one,
bizarre.
right?
So it comes already from, kind of this pedigree of these kind of weird out there movies done by these guys who do these weird out there things. And so even that, is tempting enough for me to be interested.
It's true, right? There are these little camps of people, right? You have like the sort of a Wes Craven and Sean Cunningham's and, sort of their circle of people who were doing The Hills Have Eyes and the slasher movies and Friday the 13th. And then you kind of have this camp of like Sam Raimi and like his group. We've talked about this, how you see that, like, even though like directors of some movies will end up acting in other people's movies or they'll produce each other's movies and stuff like that. And then over here you have Empire Pictures and Full Moon Pictures. And Brian Yuzna and Stuart Gordon and the guy who did I think like Return of the Living Dead and that seemed to be like another camp. These all kind of like very successful production houses or production teams, or just like we've said, like people who just kind of seem to know each other and encourage each other and work on each other's projects. And this definitely comes from that side, and I'm getting a greater appreciation for this camp.
Yeah.
As we do this podcast, because some of them, I used to laugh because a lot of the Full Moon Pictures or Empire Pictures that are produced, they're pretty. I don't want to say bad.
Well, some of them are. Some of them are bad.
They're bad. But a lot of them are well, they're almost all low budget. They're almost all, the acting can vary as far as quality goes. But the concepts, they're just a couple steps beyond pure exploitation that get you beyond exploitation and sort of into, wow, this is kind of interesting and unique and original realm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like we did, like Dolls is an interesting movie. Even that Silent Night, Deadly Night Initiation was an interesting movie.
Yeah.
Society was a really weird movie, but my goodness, like how fun.
Oh gosh, yeah, it was super original and interesting.
Puppet Master series and all that. So it's like there is this camp here that I'm kind of like, and I saw a lot of what I liked about these kinds of movies in Re-Animator. And I think Re-Animator is definitely up at the top of the pack.
Yeah.
As far as production value, as far as acting, sincerity, even special effects, particularly for the time, are quite impressive. I read that the producer, I can't remember the owner of Full Moon Pictures.
It's Charles Band, isn't it?
Charles Band, yes, that's right. He didn't even like this movie when he produced it. Although, apparently, his production house was only going to distribute the movie. And then after they started seeing dailies, they decided to get a little more involved in the production of it and help them out a little bit more in that way. Richard Band, his brother, composed the music. He's composed the music for a ton of these films. I think we're going to have a lot of fun talking about it. I really enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I would, and it wasn't as... The movie calls itself a horror comedy in a lot of places. It's not, if you say, hey, we're going to sit down and watch this horror comedy, you're going to have an expectation that this movie is not going to meet. It is not a laugh out loud, a lot of silly stuff happening. It's darkly comic.
Yeah.
It's not a so bad it's funny movie. It's very clearly intentionally darkly comic. And I think that it just reaches a certain level of sophistication there where there's that layer there for you. If you enjoy that kind of thing and you're looking for it, you definitely get it. And so there are scenes where on their face, as we describe them, you're going to think, oh my God, this is terrible. But there's a layer to those scenes that plays out that I was laughing in the movie.
Yeah.
A movie that can kind of touch all these little places and hit all these buttons for you simultaneously is impressive. So ultimately, I really enjoyed watching this again.
Yeah, it was an interesting watch. I think that a lot of the comedy comes from the intensity of Jeffrey Combs' performance as Herbert West, who is kind of... I don't know if he's the main character, but he's a central character for sure. And we can talk more about him in a second, but the inspiration for the movie, Stuart Gordon was just talking with some friends about his frustration that there were so many vampire movies, particularly Dracula movies and Dracula knockoffs. And he thought that it would be interesting to, break out of that and see something different, like more Frankenstein-inspired movies. And one of his friends said, well, have you read this story, Herbert West, Re-Animator, by H.P. Lovecraft? And Gordon was familiar with Lovecraft's work, but not that particular story, which had been out of print for a long time. So he went to the library and he read it, and he was inspired by it, and that's where the idea for this movie came from. But he initially conceived it as a stage play, a completely straight, no humor involved stage play. And then that evolved into a television pilot, a 30-minute television pilot. And then I think he wrote something like 13 or 19 episodes of this television show.
Yeah. With a couple co-writers, yeah. And it was also told, half hour is not saleable, like make it an hour. So 13 hours of this, I guess, presumably for season 1, right?
Right.
If not, it is the kind of thing that I suppose could, especially nowadays, would make for an interesting television series.
It could, I think, but I don't remember exactly how it happened. But eventually, it continued to evolve and it became a feature film.
Well, there's more of a market for horror on television now than there used to be.
That's right. Yeah. And so this is what it became. And the story, they had initially intended to try to remain really faithful to Lovecraft's story, which, by the way, I haven't read. I have read some of Lovecraft's stuff, but I've not read this, so I can't speak to how faithful it is. But they eventually deviated from the story a little bit. From my understanding is that this movie kind of adapts the first half of Lovecraft's story, and then the second movie, Bride of Reanimator, kind of adapts the second half of the story, or at least elements of it, and then the third movie is called Beyond Reanimator because it goes beyond the story that Lovecraft told in his original tale. I've not seen either of the sequels. I've read about them, and they sound kind of interesting, but I haven't seen them yet. But here we are with this movie. It opens at Zurich University, and there's this big commotion. There's screaming behind a door, and security guards and a nurse are frantically knocking at the door and calling the name of this doctor, Dr. Gruber, Hans Gruber. And when they finally burst in, they see young medical student Herbert West, played by Jeffrey Combs, grappling with this Dr. Gruber, who is freaking out, and he's got his face, his eyeballs and the veins in his face are pulsating, and his eyes burst, and blood sprays all over the nurse. The nurse says, "You killed him," and he very seriously and very sweaty says,
"No, I did not. I gave him life."
This was Jeffrey Combs, one of his first major roles. He took it, he said, because he needed the work, and he never expected that it would have a wide audience anyway. Ironically, this is absolutely 100% the defining role of his career.
Yeah.
He has played it again in both of the sequels, and most of his other work has been in horror, playing characters much like this one. He plays it very serious, very over the top, and he just has this lunatic intensity in every scene.
Yeah, but you know what? It's actually, I mean, when you say over the top, yes. I mean, he's playing it very sincerely, and he's playing it very hardcore, but it's not a parody. You know what I mean? It's not a silly, crazy campy, I think, mad scientist, in this case, med student, who's dead serious about his work and believes that he's going to be reanimating the dead and, nobody understands my genius kind of thing. The way that he played it, and I was quite impressed by it, I think I in my life have known at least 3 or 4 people very antisocial like him. I mean, they're not reanimating the dead, but they're people who are just a little off, a little narcissistic, maybe somewhere on a particular spectrum, but I don't really know how to describe this. But there are just people who don't get feelings, who don't really care about others. Like, they're just lacking a little bit of this humanity, and usually they're obsessed with something, right? They're obsessed with a collection, or they're obsessed with a particular hobby, or they're obsessed with their work. And even though he's a dick.
Yeah,
he comes across from the get-go in this movie as, like, within 5 seconds of meeting him, he's the kind of guy he's a dick. At the same time, I have known people like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know that I've known people like this, but he does. I mean, like you said, he just plays it in such a sincere way. You could say he's a dick, and I would say he's a dick, but you could also argue that he's just completely straightforward. Like, he tells it like it is, or at least the way that he sees it. So if he has a criticism of something or someone, he will just say it directly to their face.
He'll say it, and if you don't like it, he doesn't really care, or he just doesn't get why not everybody else sees the world the way he does. He doesn't get, hey, he just told you something straight, like you should agree with him, and if you don't, well, that's your problem. And there were times in the movie where he could have veered into this sort of caricature, and he didn't. And I was really impressed with that restraint. As silly as the whole concept of the movie is, and as silly as the movie does get, it made his character more believable to me. I could relate to him, even though ultimately he's not a likable character for the most part.
Yeah, I don't think I could relate to him, but I do really like Jeffrey Combs' performance. In fact, I believe that this movie rests on his shoulders. I don't think that this movie would be as well remembered if it weren't for his performance. I could be wrong. Maybe another actor could have done it differently or similarly, and with similar results. I don't know, but Jeffrey Combs is unique. He has a unique style, at least as he works in this film. And I like, he pops up in things, particularly in horror movies, and I'm always happy to see him.
Cellar Dweller, right? He was the cartoonist. He had a very brief cameo role in the beginning.
Yes. Yeah, I liked him in that. I just watched The House on Haunted Hill from the early aughts, I think.
Oh yeah,
it's not a good movie, but he's in it, and he plays a crazy doctor in that.
I forgot that.
So after that opening scene, then we get the opening credits, which the visuals of the opening credits I really liked. It's all like illustrations out of medical textbooks.
Mm-hmm.
Done in like fluorescent colors and changing colors, and the illustrations kind of swirl around. It's a great visual. I really enjoyed it. I also really liked the score, but the film is somewhat heavily criticized for borrowing heavily from the score of Psycho, which it's blatant on its face. They've outright accused him of plagiarizing. The score is very fitting for the movie. In addition to kind of sounding like Psycho, it also reminded me a lot of the score of Troll, which I love. And also, I don't know if you're familiar with this movie or not, but the movie Death Becomes Her with Goldie Hawn and Meryl Streep.
Oh, yeah. I love that one.
Me too. Very similar score. Very, very similar. And shockingly, a very similar movie about a serum that reanimates the dead. So maybe that was intentional on the makers of that movie's part. But
that's a very interesting point. When that score first came on, I was like, wait a second. This is the freaking score to Psycho. How did they pull that off? Did they get permission to use it? Whatever. And you're right. It is, to say it's borrowed is a very generous, or inspired by. It's a blatant ripoff. And I think Richard Mann's even admitted. He said, "Yeah, I took the score from Psycho because I thought it was fitting because the character is a bit Norman Batesy, but then I, added my own touch and flair to it." I'm like, what composer does that? That is, you've got giant balls. Oh, I'm just going to take the score from Psycho and add my own flair to it and put it in the opening credits and a motif throughout the whole film. But it works.
Honestly, I very much enjoyed the score. I liked it throughout.
Yeah,
and I thought that it really set a good tone and atmosphere throughout. I mean, and it varies depending on what type of action is happening, but I really liked it. We jump into the main story, which takes place at Miskatonic Medical School in Arkham, Massachusetts. Arkham is a common set piece for H.P. Lovecraft stuff, and this is where we meet our main characters. We've got a young, good-looking doctor resident, I believe, Dan Kane, played by Bruce Abbott, and we see him. It ends up kind of being significant, I guess. The first time we meet him, he's frantically performing CPR on this heavy woman, and he's unable to revive her. The supervising doctor tells him, sometimes you just have to let people go or whatever, which it's a bookend. It comes back at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Interesting piece of trivia. Bruce Abbott, who plays the doctor, said that he was really, really intense in this CPR scene, and he believes that he actually broke like 3 ribs of the extra who he was working on here. Also, this woman, this heavyset woman who he's working on, who, her shirt is ripped open, so her boobs are just flopping around. Apparently, I don't even know what this means, but apparently she was a dildo enthusiast. And so she hid dildos all around the set. That's hilarious. And I wish that I had a friend who was a dildo enthusiast, just so I could tell people that. Oh, this is my friend. She's a dildo enthusiast.
We should have consulted a dildo enthusiast to give us a little more insight into this, and maybe go frame by frame through the movie and point some things out to us. I have to say at this point, one thing I really respected about this movie was the casual nudity. There's a lot of nudity in this movie. A lot. But it's not normal. It's not normal for horror movies nudity. It's normal for life nudity for the most part. This guy's got her chest open. They got doctors standing around, and she's not this absolutely gorgeous, perfect body person. Yeah. This isn't supposed to be a titillating, exploitative scene with the nudity. And everywhere else through the movie, when we get reanimated corpses and things like that, it's they don't even put fake underwear or whatever. No, these bodies are going to be nude, and so when they leap up and start running around, they're nude. And I was like, I really appreciate this. It serves the story. It's very honest, true to life.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially with the corpses and stuff, because corpses aren't dressed. They are naked. I thought that it was a little strange for whatever reason, especially since initially they released this unrated, that they clearly went out of their way with angles to never show penis.
True.
Women, full frontal, great, no problem. Men, it was always shot in such a way that the legs were, just at such an angle that no penis. And whatever, that's fine. I don't care. I've seen enough dick in my life that I don't need to see it in a movie. But but it was just interesting to me that they kind of went out of their way to hide that. But yeah, other than that, there is a lot. The other main characters, there's the dean of the university, Dean Halsey, who introduces Dr. Dan to their new student resident, who is Herbert West, Jeffrey Combs, who we've already met. And then one of the professors at the medical school is Dr. Carl Hill, played by an actor, a tall, gaunt actor named David Gale. I think that this part was originally written for Christopher Lee, I think. One of the famous, horror icons. He turned it down. And he's a brain doctor. Herbert West immediately insults him to his face.
I know your work, Dr. Hill, quite well. Your theory on the location of the will in the brain is interesting. Though derivative of Dr. Gruber's research in the early 70s. So derivative, in fact, that in Europe it's considered plagiarized. And your support of the 12-minute limit on the life of the brainstem after death.
6 to 12 minutes, Mr.
West. Herbert West. Frankly, Dr. Hill, your work on brain death is outdated.
That's just the kind of guy he is.
Yeah.
And then there's also Dan's girlfriend, Megan, played by a very young, beautiful, fresh-faced Barbara Crampton.
Yeah.
Who is an icon, an absolute icon of the horror world. And she's young and gorgeous here. She's of a certain age and gorgeous now, and still working all of the time. She's a huge star in the world of horror, and it's really she's good. She's fun in this movie. She's pretty. She's not afraid to let her tits out. She's fully nude towards the end of the movie.
Yeah.
She's stripped completely nude, and she's talked about it. She's talked about doing nudity in her films, and she just said, if it serves the story, if it serves the film, I'll do it. I don't care. The quote that I read was from an interview that she did sometime post 2000, and she said, I would still do it now. She's like, I don't know, when I'm, a withered old grandmother, maybe I'll feel differently, but maybe not. Nudity just doesn't bother her. And she's a beautiful woman. I also think that she's a representation of a healthy body, she's not rail thin. She looks like a healthy young woman, and I have a lot of admiration for her just because of all of the work that she's done and how she's represented herself and maintained such a impressive career.
She has, even today, right? And this is one of her very first film roles. I think she was on Days of Our Lives just up until the year before this movie came out. She had a couple film roles, one movie, Body Double, one movie called Fraternity Vacation, and then this one. And then I think the very next year, we saw her in one of my all-time favorite movies, Chopping Mall. And she hasn't really left the horror genre since, except she's dipped back and forth into soap operas a little bit every now and then. Like in the 90s, I think she was back in a couple of those.
It's not surprising at all. I feel like the horror world and the daytime soap world, they cross paths all the time. But not only is she Dan's girlfriend, but she's also Dean Halsey's daughter. Dan and Megan, we find out that they're a couple, and then immediately there's a quick sex scene between the two of them, and then Herbert West responds to not an advertisement, but like a bulletin board post that Dan had made looking for a roommate. So West moves in with Dan. He's all excited about the house because it's got a basement that he can set up a lab in. I don't know, a lot of things happen, but I don't know how much of it's consequential. Like one of the scenes that I thought was really funny, and I don't understand, was that we see Dan and West in Dr. Hill's class, and Hill is demonstrating how to open a head for brain surgery, and West is just sitting there in the class strangely snapping pencils in half, with a real intensity in his face. I'm like, what are you doing?
It's so weird. I wondered for a while if it was a very an outdated reference to something. You know what I mean? Is this the way that people used to tease their professors or interrupt them in the middle of a speech by loudly snapping a pencil or something? But it irritates the hell out of him. And I think probably the most consequential thing that we have going on here is this dynamic as being set up, where Dan Kane and Megan are dating, and she's the dean's daughter, and that's problematic because, he possibly could be accused, I suppose, of currying favor with the dean, which maybe would be a big deal, and it would ruin his career if it's found out that they're sleeping together. The dean would be angry if I mean, he knows that he knows that they're dating,
Right.
but I guess he doesn't know they're sleeping together. Okay.
That was so hilarious to me. Like,
It was so funny.
Dan is a med student, and it's not like they're 16. These are people in their 20s.
Yeah.
And the dad, the dean, knows they're dating, but it would be like a huge deal if he found out they were also fucking. Like,
Yes.
come on.
What?
Come on. Of course they are.
You're a doctor. You know how these things work. Of a university, especially.
Well, and then there's also a weird dynamic. At one point, Dr. Hill, who's just kind of creepy
Yes.
anyway, he has dinner with the dean and Megan, and he's
Yes.
super creepy towards Megan. It's disgusting.
Up to this point, my sympathies were with Dr. Hill. I thought Dr. Hill seemed fairly normal dude. He's a professor. He's very distinguished. He's well respected. He's got this, they mentioned something about his amazing new laser surgery tool that's going to revolutionize brain science or whatever, and he's getting grants for the university, and he's really chummy with the dean. And then West comes in. He's super douchey to him. And yeah, you sympathize with Hill, not with West, up to this point. And then they have this lovely little, I call it like a little 80s fancy dinner for rich people, right?
Yeah.
And I love these scenes in movies from this era where it's like in their home, they're sitting down and they have a white tablecloth and linen napkins, and all the fine china is out. And they're drinking wine from crystal goblets and pouring brandy from. I mean,
And they're dressed for the occasion, like
they're dressed in suits, and they're like lit candles on the table. You know, like, did anybody ever really do this? I don't know, but that's how it's portrayed in movies all the time. And this is a real pivotal scene, and it's also a very baffling scene. I was shocked that Yuzna didn't direct this because these are the kinds of scenes sometimes we get in the movies that he's involved with.
It felt very society, sure.
Yeah, it just, things suddenly take a turn for the surreal, both in the cinematography, and I liked that. It really puts you off. It's just a very weird psychological effect. They're all sitting and chatting. Hill is actually kind of putting the screws a little bit to the dean, saying, I heard, I know that your daughter is dating this guy. Do you really think that's appropriate? And he kind of mentions West. West just moved in with this guy, and I think the two of them are working on something that's kind of bad news. And then the daughter comes in. I think, she's sitting there. But Dan comes in to pick her up. And they all shake hands and things. And Hill is like, oh, no, you should stay, have a couple drinks with us. And they're like, no, we really need to get going. And then he practically commands them. No, stay, have a drink. And they all kind of look around, and there's some awkwardness, and he's like, okay, we'll have a drink. And then he starts grilling Dan on West. I hear that West is staying at your house, and blah, 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 blah. They leave, and as soon as they leave, Hill starts asking Dean Halsey. He's like, I don't think it's appropriate that your daughter be dating this guy. Do you realize what it would do for your reputation and for his reputation? You need to get rid. And while he's saying these things, the camera now suddenly, we've almost like from Dean's perspective. So Hill is now suddenly, the backdrop disappears. It's almost like he's in a black room with this spooky kind of backlighting, staring straight into the camera and very deadpan. Eventually you realize it's like he's hypnotizing him. He's got this sort of hypnotic aspect to him where he's delivering his lines very slow and very deliberate. And then it goes back to Dean Halsey, and he's entranced. It just gets right to him. And then the fire, it starts to focus on the fire, and then suddenly we see the light of the fire on them. It gets very surreal and almost dreamlike and weird right here.
Yeah, it was initially a subplot that ended up getting dropped, that he does have the ability to Jedi mind trick people.
But it wasn't totally dropped. I mean,
there are
he
still
does this
fragments
several
of it.
times through the movie.
You see him do it once with West. It could, in the scene with West later, it could just be kind of seen as intimidation, but that's out of character for West. West is not easily intimidated.
Yes.
So if you know that it was initially intended as a subplot that he could mind control people, it makes a lot more sense. Otherwise, you're like, what? All of a sudden, why now is West, who has been defiant, why all of a sudden is he submissive? And it also explains other things too, like the fact that in the end, there's a whole gang of reanimated corpses, and West can apparently puppeteer all of them at the same time.
Well, I felt it was sort of still in there. Because then, you know, the later scene with West where he's talking to him and West is also seemingly entranced, it's shot very much the same way. And that was the point when I realized, oh, this isn't just weirdness, like he has some kind of special mental power. I didn't think it was supernatural. I thought, oh, well, this is a brain surgeon. He's clearly studied how to, you know, maybe somehow hypnotize people or whatever and do it. And I don't know, it was an interesting and unique element that kind of came out of nowhere. And I liked it. But just like Society and just like some of the things I like about some of these other films is it's way out of left field. And the movie becomes very surreal during these moments. And it kind of puts you on edge a little bit. And I really liked that bit.
Well, it is. I mean, it definitely is still there. It's just that it's never commented on or explained. So
yeah, that's right.
You just kind of have to figure it out for yourself, I guess.
But also what happens during the scene is suddenly you realize things are more complicated than you thought, right? Because up to this point, I don't know how you felt, I felt of Hill as a sympathetic character. And after this scene, I was like, God, he's a douchebag too.
Well, I thought he was a douchebag anyway, but it wasn't so much, you know, the mind control thing that freaked me out. It was the creepy, gross, disgusting toast that he does to Megan.
Well then, one last toast. To Megan. My esteemed colleagues, capable, beautiful, loving daughter. The obsession of all who fall under her spell.
Like, ew, gross. And he says that right in front of her dad and her boyfriend. Like, ugh.
Yeah.
And gross. And he clearly is obsessed with her, which comes in to play later. But basically, Dan finds out about West's work with reanimating corpses because West, he kills Dan's cat. He claims that he found it dead, but that seems highly improbable. Megan finds the cat in, like, West's dorm fridge in his room, which is also a funny scene because West is incensed that anybody would have the audacity to come into his room, even though he's got his roommate's
cat
in his refrigerator. And then there's a great scene where it's the middle of the night and Dan hears a terrible noise from the cellar, and it sounds like a possessed cat or a cat screaming or something, and he goes down to the cellar to find West being attacked by this cat. I can't believe, is this 2 weeks in a row that we've had a genetically enhanced evil cat? Like, you go 6 years with no genetically enhanced evil cats, and then 2 in a row.
And I think for Uninvited, I did say this is the very first horror movie that we've done with a genetically enhanced mutant cat. No, I didn't realize there was another one right around the corner.
Right around the corner. And so he's reanimated this cat, and they fight it, and it's hilarious because they're obviously fighting a toy.
It's so funny. Well, it's just it's well shot too, actually. When he comes down the stairs, like he kind of knocks a light. It's like it's like your typical dark basement that's lit by one swinging light, and so the light starts swinging around. And so I think part of what actually makes this scene work and feel more intense due to their low budget is just the fact that that light is coming in and out at regular intervals. It's almost strobing, right?
Yeah.
So that also sort of helps to hide the fact that they're running around the basement, absolutely destroying it with bats and things just to get to this cat. And then when the cat finally does leap back out at Dan, he catches the cat and throws it against the wall.
Yeah.
It smacks the wall and falls down. And I mean, I just thought it was hilarious. I'm sorry.
It is hilarious.
Laughing so hard.
It's gross. It's a bloody movie. It's a violent movie. Dan kills the cat, and then West is like, I can reanimate things, and he tells him the whole thing, and Dan's like, I don't believe you. He's like, okay, well, watch this. So he injects the cat again with this serum. He's got this serum that is quite literally glow stick liquid. So it's this,
Looks
luminescent,
awesome.
glowing. Yeah, it looks great. He injects it into the cat. The cat is mangled beyond repair, but it comes back to life anyway. So it's just this mangled puppet, bloody cat, like writhing around on the table. And it's disgusting. It looks fake, but it's gross. Megan comes in and sees it.
Don't expect it to tango. It has a broken back.
Why'd you make that noise?
Birth is always painful.
It was dead.
Twice.
What are you doing here?
This is where, the dark comedy of this comes in. The fight with the cat is funny, although it shouldn't be, right? It's like, oh, cruelty to animals, whatever. He reanimates this dead, mangled cat, which must be absolutely horrible for the cat. But it still looks kind of funny. And of course, Megan comes in. She's already distraught about her cat being dead, and she comes in right at the moment where she can see her mostly mangled cat, like meowing and
Writhing.
stuff. And I'm sorry, I laughed at that too. I thought it was hilarious.
It was funny.
What's wrong
It was
with
funny.
me?
And West wants Dan to like be his assistant, and he's like, we'll be famous. We can defeat death. You'll be famous and live lifetimes, because he's convinced that eventually. As of right now, he's just been experimenting on animals, and they come back and they're violent. But he thinks if he can reanimate a human corpse not long after it dies, that it will retain its consciousness and memories and those things. And he thinks they can be famous, but Dan, I guess, isn't ready to do that. So instead, he rats on West to Halsey, which totally backfires, because Halsey rescinds Dan's scholarship money, and he kicks West out of school. So I guess at this point, Dan feels like he has no other choice but to try to work with West, because what else are they going to do?
Yeah.
They're both kicked out of school or whatever. So they sneak into the morgue. And that's when things get really fun.
West kind of convinces him, right, that like, look, this is our only option. Like, we know we can do this, and we can turn Halsey around if we can just prove to him, that we can do it. So we've got to go. And I guess he thinks that if they just carry this little tape recorder around, like scientists do in movies where they record their notes in real time into tape recorder, that if they do that while they're trying to reanimate a corpse in the morgue and are successful, then that's the proof they need to show to the dean. This is when all hell breaks loose, though, because
it's fun though. Like they go to the morgue, and they're like looking at different bodies and looking at cause of death and seeing which one would be the most viable. And they end up finding this guy who had only died a couple of hours before, and he seemed otherwise healthy. This guy is actually Arnold Schwarzenegger's longtime body double.
no way.
Yeah, body doubled for Schwarzenegger in multiple movies, and he looks like him. I mean, he's huge.
Yeah.
That would not be the person that I would choose to reanimate. Obviously, it's a big mistake, because this guy comes back to life, and he's violent, and he's like throwing them all around. Halsey and Megan are there looking for Dan, and Halsey comes in, and the huge naked reanimated corpse kills him, and then West takes down the corpse, like uses like a bone saw or something, cuts all the way through his chest, and so the corpse is dead again. But now Halsey's also dead. But since he only died moments before, West injects him with the serum, thinking that he'll, come back fully aware and all that stuff. And he does come back, and he seems maybe a little bit more aware than the other guy had, but he's still crazy and whacked out and violent.
Cowering in the corner.
And and Megan comes in and sees him, and they say that, West explains that he came in and he was acting all crazy, and now he's, I don't know. He explains it away somehow. I'm not sure exactly. Megan's distraught, obviously, but Dr. Hill, the brain doctor, assures her, "Oh, don't worry, I'll take good care of your dad. And if you need anything, if you're lonely," like again, totally creeping on her, disgusting.
Yeah. He's trying his hypnotic act on her, basically. And it almost works, except, well, I love that Dr. Hill has an office that also has a padded room right next to it.
Yeah.
With a window in there. How convenient.
Yeah, a one-way mirror.
I read also in the trivia that padded room was so poorly constructed that the actor playing her dad couldn't really bounce around the walls because he tried it once and it knocked a wall down. But yeah, he bangs his kind of forehead on the glass. And so, Dr. Hill's like, "I'm going to take control of the situation. I'm going to take care of your dad. You just trust me. And if there's anything you need, blah, 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 blah." In the meantime, he decides he is going to investigate Halsey. And so he pulls Halsey into his lab, I guess, autopsy room. I mean, he's not dead. And he's done all these scans and things on him. He said he has Megan sign a release form so that he can do exploratory surgery on him under the guise of fixing his brain. But what he instead does is once he realizes this guy should be dead, but he's not, he decides he needs to make the patient docile so that for further study. And so he uses his little laser tool to basically lobotomize him through the forehead.
Yeah, but he also immediately goes to West's basement lab and is like, "I know what you're doing. You have to tell me your secrets." And he Jedi mind tricks West. So West gives him his notes, and Hill's looking through the notes. He's like, "Oh my God, this is genius. I'm going to be famous." And while he's got his back turned, West hits him with a shovel and then decapitates him with a shovel, and then immediately thinks, "You know what? I've never tried this serum just on different parts before." So he injects it into the head and he injects it into the torso, both of which reanimate separately. And for whatever reason, West does kind of retain some of his consciousness because he can talk. He talks weird, like he talks slow and low, but he can talk.
You mean Hill.
And
Yeah,
that's what I mean. Sorry, Hill. Yeah, he talks low and slow, but he can talk, and he can also like remotely control his torso. And so then the rest of it is hilarious because Hill is like walking around carrying his own head like in a bowling bag and wearing like a CPR dummy head on his shoulders. Oh, it's really, really funny. And he goes back to the lab where then he like hypnotizes the Dean Halsey like through the mirror. That was a weird scene. But it was cool. And then he sends Halsey to abduct Megan, which he does. Yep. His own daughter. Halsey abducts his own daughter, lays her on the autopsy table right next to Hill's head, which is like leering lasciviously at her. Halsey strips his own daughter completely nude, ties her down to this table so that Hill can molest her. And it's weird. I assume that this is the part that you were talking about where it's so absurd and so like uncomfortable, but at the same time hilarious.
Yeah, it's one of them. Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, this is a severed head that is raping this girl as she's tied down by her own father. I mean, he's obviously like not in control of himself, right? He wouldn't have done that otherwise. But still, it's very disturbing. And then Hill has his body pick up his head, and it's just like what's really funny is when she wakes up and she looks left and she looks down, sees that she's naked. She starts screaming. She looks left. She sees this bloodied head of the doctor just like, right next to her, screaming, looks up and sees this weird looking man standing over her, kicks the guy, which knocks the fake dummy head off of him, and screams some more. I mean, it's so hilarious, even though you shouldn't be laughing at this girl in her actual situation.
Right, because it is gross. Like, he's definitely molested. Like, he fondles her breasts.
Through the body.
and then through the body, and then the body picks up the head, and he kisses her and licks her face, and then like sucks at her breast. Which, I mean, this in the context of the movie, it's gross. But I'm also just kind of thinking of like these actors really had to do this, and this is really intimate in a gross way. And then the body moves the head down between her legs.
His tongue is out.
It's really pretty darn graphic, but I feel like at this point West and Dan bust in right before, like seemingly right before the body was going to thrust the head right,
Between her legs.
into her lady area.
Oh, yeah. It was it was right in the nick of time.
And I guess, apparently this actor was really troubled at performing this scene.
Yeah.
Very, very uncomfortable performing the scene. And I guess his wife was troubled by it too, because when she saw it, she jumped up and left the screening and then divorced him. Surely there's more to it, but seemingly this was like the straw that broke the camel's back, and she literally divorced him because she was so disgusted. But Dan and West show up and are saving the day or whatever. And West is confronting Hill again, insulting him, and says something like, it's the greatest line in the movie.
You'll never get credit for my discovery. Who's going to believe a talking head? Get a job in a sideshow.
And he just says it with such sincerity. It's laugh out loud funny. But West is like, I have a plan, and Hill's like, so do I. And then all of the other corpses in the morgue spring to reanimated life and begin to attack Dan and West. And then there's a whole big fight scene that goes on for a long time with all these naked people.
Mm-hmm. And then it gets into like bizarro territory where I think at one point West says something, I guess this was his plan. He said something like, I never tried overdose. And he jams 2 of these needles into the back of one of the I think it was...
it's Hill's body.
His body falls down, and I guess it just decides to reanimate all of the organs in his body.
Yeah.
Because his chest bursts open, and these intestines start flying out and wrapping themselves around West. That's how West dies.
Well, it's left, I mean, because he comes back for the sequels. But,
yeah, we don't know if he's dead.
But that's the last we see of him, right? He, as, Megan and Dan are fighting off corpses too, but they kind of get free and are running out. Meanwhile, like, chemical smoke is filling the room. And West screams at Dan, my notes, take my notes. And he throws his notes, and Dan takes them. But that's the last we see of him.
Yeah.
He's presumably dead, but we don't actually see him die, which in horror movies, means he's probably coming back at some point. But he doesn't come back in this movie. They run away, but they're pursued by a couple more corpses, one of which gets a hold of Megan and starts throttling her. And Dan can't get the corpse off, so he runs down the hall and breaks the glass and gets the fire axe and comes back and chops up the corpse and gets it off of Megan, but it's too late. She's dead. He races her to the emergency room and puts her, on a gurney and tries to give her CPR. Again, here we are, right back where we started.
Same people and everything.
Same
Doctors
people.
surrounding her.
Mm-hmm. And he's trying to resuscitate her. They try to, shock her. But she's dead, and all the other doctors walk away, and he has West's bag, and he pulls out the serum, and he says, I love you, and injects her, and then it cuts to black, and we just hear her scream. So apparently she has been reanimated, but that's the end. And then, of course, the sequel is Bride of Reanimator, and they wanted Barbara Crampton to come back and play the bride, but it was a small role, and her agent basically told her that it was beneath her to take such a small role, so she didn't come back. So they cast somebody else, a different woman, and in the story, they set out to build a perfect woman using different parts of different women, and they use Megan's heart. So she's still there, but it doesn't look like her. And then in the third one, which came out in the 2000s sometime, West is in prison, and I think like a prison doctor convinces him to continue his experiments or something. And then there were other planned sequels. Like there was a planned sequel where either West or Dan, I don't remember, one of them was going to be called to the White House to reanimate the dead president or vice president of the United States. That was going to be House of Reanimator. And then there was another one too that was going to have West lose his memory and have to start his experiments all over again. But those never came to fruition. But this one, again, I can't really give any kind of critique on the sequels because I haven't seen them. And I don't know that I'm necessarily even going to race out to see them. Maybe someday if I come upon them. But I'm pretty much satisfied with this one on its own. And it's not my favorite movie. I don't feel compelled to watch it over and over again. But I do have a lot of appreciation for it. There's really a lot of good stuff going on. The effects are good. It's really bloody. It's a super bloody movie. Practical effects that don't always look real, but it looks like they took a lot of care with. The acting is good. I really like Jeffrey Combs' performance. It's unique. It's a little bit over the top, in my opinion, but in a good way. I think that it serves the story well. Love Barbara Crampton. So there's a lot of things to like. It's an original take, even though it's clearly inspired by the story of Frankenstein. It's an original take. It's a unique movie. It's different than other things that were going on at the time, and there's really not been anything that I've seen that has been a lot like it. It kind of stands on its own. So I would definitely recommend it to any horror enthusiast who hasn't seen it. And I'd be willing to bet that any real fan of horror would, like me, at least appreciate a lot of things about it, if not I think a lot of people would just outright love it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I echo everything that you said. I thought it was a really interesting take on the Frankenstein story. It kind of hits very similar beats. It goes a little above and beyond, modernizes it, and also adds a lot of blood and gore and fun effects, you know. Sometimes it looks cheap and silly, but it's the 80s.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a lower budget movie. It's got a little bit of camp in it, but I was surprised, actually, at the lack of camp, like overt camp. I expected it to come across more campy than it really does. And I think, again, part of that is due to the filmmakers involved. Like we've talked about before with, like, again, in this wheelhouse, like Troll, Society, those kinds of things. They do get, some of these movies are quite campy, but also there's just another layer there. There's just this real surreal, very original quality to them that we end up really enjoying. And even big budget horror movies or Hollywood movies in general can't always do that. So I can see why the movie is memorable, not just because of that shocking scene with Barbara Crampton, but I am actually happy to hear that scene wasn't traumatic for her.
Yeah, me too.
You know, and everybody seemed to walk away with good feelings about the movie and about their participation in it. So it's ended up with a life on its own on home video, and it's well regarded right now. Even Roger Ebert, can you believe that, gave this movie like 3 out of 4 stars when he originally reviewed it, and he even said something like, you know, I can't even explain why. I just walked out of the movie theater feeling like totally satisfied and uplifted when I was in a room full of people, you know, wildly yelling at the screen.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, I totally get that. So
it's also right now, as of, you know, this recording, it's easily accessible. It's streaming in lots of places. It's streaming for free on Tubi. It's on Shudder, and I think several other places as well. So if you haven't seen it, you should be able to find it pretty easily.
Well, thank you again for listening to another episode. If you enjoyed this one, please share it with a friend. You can find us online if you just Google Two Guys in a Chainsaw Podcast, where you'll find our Facebook page, our Twitter feed, our Patreon page. If you'd like to become a patron of the show and have access to some extra things that we have, some mini-sodes out there. We've talked about a lot of random things, about the horror video games, about a little more in depth about the 80s slasher movie month that we did last month. All these things you can find if you become a patron of our podcast. And we really thank all of our patrons as well as our regular listeners for all of your support. Thank you so much, and spread the love. Until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys in a Chainsaw.